we want to now switch into wheat. And so we're moving into the bread lab, literally, and Professor Stephen Jones will speak on a whole grain future, a plant breeder's perspective on flavor and nutrition. Steve, take it away. Thank you for being here.
I'm Stephen Jones. I'm going to bip through this really quickly. I have 20 minutes and I'll try to stay right on time. So we're plant breeders. We're breeders that bake. We breed wheat and its relatives for baking, brewing, distilling. And I'm really going to expand on or continue David's discussion and a few of the others in terms of the nutritional value. Just real quickly, our lab is basically run by 4 PhD students. You heard from Laura already, she's in the top right. Mary, you'll hear from in just a bit on the bottom left there. She's listening to wheat right there. So we do some kind of quirky things too. My program has been in place since 1894. Since that time until like now, no one has asked us to breed for nutritional value or flavor since 1894. It's kind of amazing. So we added those components. Certainly flavor and nutrition go together, we believe. So this is just a shot. Breeders deal with diversity, a lot of it. So we look at tens of thousands of different wheats and barleys every year. This is borrowing from David a little bit. Kernel of wheat, and now I'm just going to go into the nutritional part of what we do. I'm not going to go into much more than that, but a kernel of wheat wants to be made into a wheat plant. It doesn't want to be made into a baguette or that beautiful waffle there. So it has everything needed for life to get going, and it has everything almost completely for our life as well. So a wheat kernel is incredibly nutrient dense. This is what's in a kernel of wheat, and David gave us those examples there. In red is what's not in red is not what's in the center of wheat, which is white flour. So the two main things in white flour, if you were the best miller in the world, you would be left with starch and two types of proteins, the gliadins and glutenins, which make gluten. The globulins and albumins are like egg white proteins. They're quite desirable. Those are gone. It's a touch of an exaggeration to say everything is out of there except that. We have baked bread with wheat starch, pure wheat starch and pure wheat gluten, and it makes a nice loaf of white bread. You wouldn't want to eat it. I wouldn't want to, but it does. One thing that's not an exaggeration is white flour has basically zero fiber. And fiber is the key. So we can talk about macros and micros, and fiber is a macronutrient. Fiber is the one. We can say, well, we're going to have iron and zinc is important, but we're going to have ham and cheese on that sandwich. If it's white bread, there's no fiber in that sandwich, right? There might be some iron and zinc though. This is a little roller mill. Mary may show this later if there's time to tour the lab. The one on the left is white flour. That's about 70% of the kernel. The one on the right is the bran and germ. 0 to 20 are those things that are in red there. Some of those in red, none of it goes into white flour. Again, bran is not there. So now I just want to get into the guts of the thing here. This is a study that came out in April of 2019. This was published in the Lancet, which is probably the premier medical journal, certainly in the UK and one of the top in the world. I get asked sometimes, yeah, what you said, where did it come from? This is where it came from. This is over 120 scientists around the world looking at 195 countries from 1990 to 2017. University of Washington is the lead on this. This is a global burden of disease. It was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is not some crazy dude in the basement, right? So these are real numbers. The UW lead on this, the global burden of disease, they've now switched to COVID the past year, but they've done a lot of different things. One is to look at what we eat as societies and cultures. So they're looking at the global burden of disease in terms of our diet. The punchline here is low intake of whole grains was the leading dietary risk in mortality among women, the leading risk for death and disability-adjusted life years among young adults, 25 to 50, the risk is greater than smoking. A DALY is bad. If you have a disease, a disability-adjusted life year, it means you're going to live less for less than you would have normally been expected to. Smoking is always thrown out as kind of the boogeyman, but what's key here is the lack of whole grains in a diet is killing more people than flaming nacho Doritos or something like that, right? I think it's really important. The key for us as a lab is to quote the authors here, and again, there's 120, our findings will inform implementation of evidence-based dietary intervention. The job of a plant breeder is intervention in this case, and we want to do a dietary intervention. Again, expanding on what David had talked about. Let's just go through a few facts here. I think facts are important. Americans eat on average, so this is North Americans, eat on average 165 grams of white flour per day. White flour is not a whole grain. That's obvious to us in this forum. That's probably not obvious to a lot of people, right? David showed that with the ham and cheese sandwich. We eat 20% about, these are all averages, which is 25 grams of the defined optimal amount of whole grains, which is 125, as David said, 125 to 140, right? What we know is we eat much less than that, about 20%. We eat on average about half of the fiber we should, which is about 25 grams. Again, these are big averages here. On average, those of us with an income of 130% or less of the poverty level, our incomes are reduced. We eat less than the above amounts of both whole grain and fiber. As our income, as our access to finances go down, so does our intake of these very important things for us. So if on average we eat 165 grams of white flour and we need 125 grams of whole grains per day, I would say only 125 grams whole grains per day. We're not talking about eating more, we could talk about eating less, right? These are, I don't want to say these are important points, but there are some points here, right? 125 grams of wheat or rye makes 125 grams of true whole grain. If we take 125 grams of grain and mill it and make flour, that's a whole grain flour. That's like eating that grain, right? Can we lose the white flour and use whole grain flour? Of course we can. Can we use less refined flour? Of course we can, but it needs to taste good. Okay, I'm gonna say that one 3 times. It needs to taste good. It needs to taste good. That's a loaf of 100% spelt on the right that I baked in my mother's kitchen, in her little oven from the 70s. I'm going to show some pictures of what can be done. Some of these were done by me. Some were done, like this one, by Jeff Yankelo and other very skilled bakers. But I want to talk about, just keep in mind, we need 125 grams of whole grain and we need 25 of fiber. Okay, this is a whole wheat croissant. It's 100% whole wheat. There's no non-food in this. By non-food, I mean, if you looked at that label that Laura showed on that deli rye, one of the ingredients there was datum, right? You'll also see Calpro and a lot of other things. These are non-foods. These are dough conditioners and preservatives and things. 40 grams of whole grain, 4 grams of fine. Eat 3 of these and declare victory, right? This is delicious. This looks right. And that's the key, what I want to go through here. These, Laura showed cookies. She made these. These are 100% rye, 5 grams each of whole grain. We eat 7 billion cookies per year in this country, 7 billion. I guarantee you almost all of those 7 billion, unless you're making them at home, have non-food in them. This is whole grain rye. You see, if you go all the way to the right, and then down one, you'll see a whole kernel of rye that was cut and left in there in these shortbreads. So this is pretty coarse milling as well. So you want to put chocolate on it, or white chocolate, or salt, or orange zest, be my guest. Wheat, buckwheat oats, these are 5 grams whole grain. Buckwheat adds lysine, which is limiting in our other grains. So buckwheat is an amazing addition. It also has resistant starches, which are important. These cookies are small. These aren't something you get at a Holiday Inn Express. Sourdough, this is a waffle that I made. That's the one on the screen there. This is a sourdough long ferment, 100% low gluten, whole wheat, 20 grams of whole grain in each of those. Again, we need 125 per day. Another Laura shot, these are rye tortillas, flour tortillas with 100% whole rye. These are 30 grams each. Make a couple burritos out of those for lunch and you're doing great. Rye on average has 15% fiber, wheat has 10. That's a big deal. Whole wheat and blue bran. I'm not talking about the colored wheats that we work with, but we do work with that. This has 18 grams of whole grain, 6 grams of fiber. I do not understand making a bran muffin with AP or white flour. Almost every recipe you'll see calls for AP and white flour in a bran muffin. To me, that seems not just counterintuitive, but if you bear with me, kind of idiotic, right? So if you're making bran muffins, use whole grain. They will be delicious. Everything I'm showing here, I'm showing to illustrate loft, lightness, deliciousness, right? There's not a pastry made that can't be made with whole grain. I challenge you to make a Toll House cookie and just take out the white flour and put in whole grain and see what you and your friends or family think about it. It'll be delicious, trust me. This is a Jeff Yankelo baguette. That's 100% whole wheat. If you bake much, which most of us do, you'd recognize that as a decent looking baguette, decent to a very good looking baguette. This is 200 grams of whole grain in that, 20 grams of fiber. I could eat that. I have eaten something like that easily. That's my whole grain for the day and a half, right? So these things, again, I'm just showing what's possible for us. It has to look good, it has to taste good, it has to function well. That's possible. And I think it's important for us to realize that. In this country, we eat 50 billion hamburgers per year. Almost every one of those is on a bun that has non-food in it and is made with white flour. These are whole grain, 100%. Louis Prager made these. These are soft and fluffy. The center one has sesame seed, which would be traditional. The other ones have blue bran dusting. 20 grams per bun. 50 billion hamburgers, we probably eat 70 billion or so hamburger buns because we're eating chicken things and other stuff on it, right? We eat 24 billion slices of pizza per year. This is made with a blue wheat. You can kind of see that. This is in our laboratory. We do fun things like make pizza. This pizza here has 30 grams of whole grain per slice. Important here, again, based on David's work, this blue wheat has twice the zinc and 3 times the iron as normal commodity wheat would have, okay? This is what we're working with. These are targets of our breeding program. 20 billion hot dogs, okay? Forget the hot dog, how about the bun, right? We eat 20 billion crappy hot dog buns per year, right? These have blue in them. That's from organic corn from Montana. Here's the kicker is pasta. This is Mark Vetri on the left, a well-known Italian chef from Philly, one of the top chefs in the nation. I'm comfortable saying that. He's in the lab. That's a 5-foot noodle sheet of 100% whole wheat. On the right is some blue pasta. We've all had really bad pasta. We can have really good pasta if we follow certain things. If you eat a quarter of a cellophane bag of pasta that was whole wheat, that would be 120. That's your 120. Eat one cookie with 5 grams and now you're 125. Declare victory. Call it a day, right? Call me on the phone and say how great it is. Okay, those are all beautiful. Many of those are by skilled bakers. But how approachable, accessible, and affordable are our breads? This bottom demonstration is from Blue Hill Restaurant, the most outstanding restaurant in the United States. That's New York. How accessible are those to most people in our community? Not much, right? So most people think of this when they think of sandwich bread or a bread that people are feeding their families. We came to this realization, embarrassingly, maybe not till 5 years ago or so, that we're working with these high-end breads, but not worrying about 99% of the people in our community and probably in most of your communities that associate bread with soft, sliced, and in a plastic wrapper. This is a Pepperidge Farm. I won't show the ingredient list to you here, but it'd be similar to the one that Laura showed you. I think there's 27 ingredients in this. This says sell by June 3rd. That slice of bread on the left there is 2.5 years old. So this loaf of bread lasted in the lab for over 2.5 years. It never molded and it stayed soft for 2.5 years, okay? That's not because of great baking, that's because of great chemistry, and that's because there's non-food in there, right? And the shame is that a lot of people are going to this style of bread thinking that it's healthy for them and their family. It's light, It says soft wheat. It says a lot of things on it. Therefore, you know, based on that loaf of bread, we decided to form something called the Breadlab Collective. This started in April of 2019. This was 2 weeks after the global burden of disease came forth with their findings. Today we have bakers in 25 states, 6 countries. The scale is from farmers markets to several million loaves per year. That would be Mediterra and Pittsburgh. Rural and urban community colleges to Ivy League. Nana's group is involved in it. Heather Strada at Kalispell, Flathead Valley Community College in Kalispell is involved. Several people. This is designed to work with this loaf of bread. And this is our approachable loaf of bread. We wanted a loaf of bread. This was designed by, and Mary will get into this. She'll show you how to make it later. There's a video on it. This is 100% whole wheat here. We ask that these be at least 60% whole wheat. That's 18 to 25 grams per slice. There's no non-food. The price must be below $6. That's, we're talking like San Francisco or San Diego. $3.50 would be a place like Kalispell. Whole grain, long ferment, 5 to 12 day shelf life, soft slice and delicious. Andrew Ross is involved in this in terms of the longevity of these loaves. This bread was perfected by us working with local food pantries, food banks, and free cafes, and working with their patrons to see if they would enjoy this type of bread, and they do. During the height of the COVID response, working with King Arthur, and King Arthur is right behind me, just 100 feet away, teaching a class distance right now. They're teaching it in donuts, and it smells really good in here. They baked, we baked some, but they baked, and we facilitated donating 6,000 of these loaves to our local community and food banks. That's the equivalent of 54,000 sandwiches. These were all 100% whole wheat. You go back to David's things, that's a big deal. 54,000 sandwiches. I'll end here in just a sec, but the quote on, we had a quote from one of the food pantries that we work with. A father and his young son were there picking up a lunch bag made with sandwiches with this bread. And he said, if that bread were not available to him, and remember at the height of COVID, bread was very hard to get. If that bread were not available to him, he would be shoplifting at Walmart to be able to feed his son. And that's my talk. So thank you very much.